Close your eyes. I want you to envision a ghost. Now, I want you to envision a clown ghost. What did your brain come up with? Was it a classic white sheet ghost with a fun little party hat? A haunted clown doll? Was it just me when I look awkward at the Halloween party? Well, what if I told you that there's been an actual reported clown haunting, and that clown probably doesn't look like what you'd expect it to look like? Our spooky story begins where many others do, a cemetery. Flaybrick Memorial Gardens, once known as Flaybrick Cemetery, resides in Birkenhead on the Wirral Peninsula in England. It officially opened May 30th, 1864. This cemetery is no longer operating as a cemetery, but instead as a historical memorial garden, and it is home to over 100,000 people. The architecture of this somber yet enchantingly beautiful place is filled with Victorian crosses, angels, and even large vaults. The Flaybrick website describes the land as a place of peace and contemplation, where a romantic profusion of impressive Gothic memorials reflect the commercial prosperity of Birkenhead, with an abundance of trees where wildlife can flourish. The Flaybrick Cemetery is the final resting place of many notable people from the Birkenhead area, notably Sir William Jackson, a railway entrepreneur, and Mary Ann Mercer, the town's first female alderman. Many of the people buried in Flaybrick have macabre and mysterious histories, like the victims of the Birkenhead dock disaster, where 14 workmen were killed when a dam collapsed during the construction of the Victoria dock. They are all buried in 3 different mass graves in Flaybrick. In Flaybrick, you can also find the graves of Catherine, Cecilia, and Doris Tam, who were murdered in 1926 by Loch Ah Tam, the husband of Catherine and father of Cecilia and Doris. The reason why this grave is notable is because their father and husband, their murderer, is mentioned on their headstone favorably, which is very peculiar and something that you wouldn't see even now. The cemetery also holds the final resting places of 219 different soldiers from both World War I and World War II. Knowing that Flaybrick is a haunting and beautiful cemetery with graves of the famous and even the unfamous, from the workmen and soldiers to the rich and powerful, it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to assume that a performer could also be buried in Flaybrick. But not just any performer. Flaybrick is rumored to be the home of a clown ghost. But not just any clown ghost, a female Pierrot that most simply call Clown Woman. One of the Clown Woman's first earliest appearances was in 1937 during the funeral of a man named Charles Fry, who had died in an Isle of Man air race. As mourners came to lay Charles to rest, they realized last minute that the wrong grave had been dug up, and during the service, amongst the commotion, people reported that a woman had appeared in a Pierrot outfit and white makeup. Apparently, she was laughing, speaking in a sing-songy voice, and making funny faces, and teasing the guests. At first, they just believed she was someone being insanely disrespectful of the dead, until she started disappearing and reappearing in different areas without any explanation, and messing with the flowers people had brought Charles, knocking down nearby urns, which brought them to the conclusion she was something supernatural, instead of just a trickster attending a funeral. They asked the gravedigger who had worked there since its opening about her, and he had said that he first saw her in 1910, but said she was simply a ghost and nothing more. Although he seemed unbothered by her, the cross he made across his chest when talking about her signaled more fear than he let on. Since then, there have been many different rumored and reported appearances of the Clown Woman, and her infamy has taken on its own legends. Reports of her with a tiny guitar or ukulele, and eerie music fading into the night had started to become quite common. In 1995, a group of mischievous teenagers broke into the cemetery to play a game of hide and seek. One of the teenagers, a 14-year-old girl, snuck away a little bit too far from the group and hid behind a giant marble cross. A large shadow appeared and then animated itself into the clown woman, and she yelled angrily for the girl to leave her grave alone.
Get the fuck out my...
Before lunging to try to choke her, the girl ran off scared, but reported the clown woman she saw had been wearing a large purple silk clown suit with pink buttons and a white cap. She also said she had metallic blue eyes that left her feeling cold. A year later, in 1996, a reporter and photographer came to Flaybrick to report on a water leak. While they were there, the clown woman leapt in front of their car and caused them to swerve. The photographer and reporter both noted she had on the same purple suit reported before by others and a chalk white face. He remembered her eyes, saying, and I quote, "Her eyes burned with mischief." Although no documentation was ever found of a female clown buried at Flaybrick, the chances of it being documented that somebody who died would be remembered as a Pierrot were quite low if they weren't a notable or famous performer, especially if they were just performing to get by and not doing so as a solid career. If someone today was doing birthday party gigs on the side and then unexpectedly died, we more than likely wouldn't bury them as Jane Doe, birthday clown. And it might even be hard for us now to find any proof of that if we were searching for it, which applied even all the way back then. So just because they couldn't find records of a clown, or any Pierrot, or any female clowns, doesn't mean that there aren't any buried there. And we need to look to the history of Pierrot around the time that Flaybrick was built in 1864, and the first clown woman ghost sightings from the 1910s to the 1930s to understand this more. And that's where things get really interesting, because when you think of Pierrot, more often than not, you're thinking of beautiful painted portraits of porcelain beauty, commedia dell'arte, and glamorous theater roles. But in the 1890s to the 1940s, Pierrots in England were almost always low-income performers that worked on the piers of places like Brighton, Margate, and Blackpool. These seaside Pierrot troupes were called concert parties, and you could find them juggling, telling jokes, and playing ukuleles and tiny guitars. In fact, there were a large number of male and female Pierrot troupes. There were even all-female Pierrot troupes. Each troupe almost always had matching outfits. These exact type of Pierrot troupes were such a popular form of comedy, they even provided entertainment to the British Armed Forces during both the First and Second World Wars. So when you take into account that the time period before and during when the clown woman was spotted lines up accurately with the local history of Pierrot troupes and concert parties being popular there, the possibility of a woman who dressed in a Pierrot costume holding a tiny guitar having actually been a real person laid to rest in Flaybrick is still a little bit higher than one might think. If you think of the way many of these seaside performers were doing this to make ends meet and were usually in poverty, it would make sense that if one of them met their untimely end, they wouldn't be buried as a glamorous performer, but instead as a regular person, as themselves. And knowing that these Pierrot troupes often entertained the soldiers in World War I and World War II, and that there were many buried in Flaybrick from these wars, the fact that this clown woman could still be doing this from beyond the grave is quite charming. Except this time, instead of making the living laugh, she's making the dead laugh, and she's heckling us. Does the trickster clown woman of Flaybrick really haunt this beautiful and somber cemetery? We'll never truly know. But does that stop me from using this as an opportunity to make you sit down and learn a little clown history? No. Although it's no longer October, I still want to keep the spooky stories going because, well, I love Halloween, and since November is my birth month, I decided to tell you a spooky story in celebration of all things creepy and crawly before the Christmas season. So happy
November,
my clowny friends, and stay spooky.